Bob joins us now. If you were in the arena last night with that game, Bob, how would you, as the host, give or convey the temperature in there?
Well, I thought they did a pretty good job of making it clear. They kept taking shots of people fanning themselves. It was uncomfortable. Forget about playing and exerting yourself. It was uncomfortable just sitting there watching it. So I think you'd probably make that point if there was an opportunity to, and if you found someone who you thought would be reasonably articulate in the crowd, maybe you could ask them what the change was from the time they first walked in to how they felt now. But I got a pretty good sense of how damn hot it was in there, and certainly LeBron did.
The Boston Garden, people keep bringing that up, that the Celtics and Lakers played. And I was working at CNN at the time, and I remember being in the building, but I knew it was going to be hot when I went into that building. The difference between last night and, say, those guys playing back in the 80s in the Boston Garden, any comparison?
Well, I think you hit it because it was completely unexpected, whereas people who went into Boston Garden knew of the treachery, both intended and unintended, of the dead spots on the floor. It was very common for the water in the showers in the visitors' locker room there never to get hot. You're taking an ice-cold shower. You might see a rodent of some kind crawling along the baseboard. I mean, that was the old Boston Garden. No one expected that to happen in Game 1 of the 2014 NBA Finals.
Toughest conditions that you've ever been part of as far as broadcasting?
This is going to be a weird answer. As you may know, the very first job I had was doing minor league hockey in the old Eastern Hockey League, the Paul Newman Slapshot League. I knew guys who were extras in the film who played in the league when I called the games. I was a senior at Syracuse, and I did the games in this bus league. And there was a game in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, in the old Johnstown War Memorial, which seated maybe 3,500. And in those days especially, it'd be a big deal. Local town, those players, even though it was a low minor league, it was a big deal. You get in for a couple of bucks. Maybe the best seat in the house cost $5, if that. And fights were so commonplace that a game that went by without 2 or 3 fights was no game at all. And so there was one game during the playoffs between Syracuse and Johnstown where not only was there a fight, there was a riot. And the fans got involved. And the next thing you know, the cops show up with dogs and batons and the whole thing. And fans are beating on the door of the visitors' locker room where the Syracuse Blazers are holed up, and they're behind the door with sticks at the ready, like the Alamo. Well, if the Mexicans breach the wall and Santa Anna comes over, at least we're ready to hit them as they come over the top. This is what was going on. So finally the game is called, and the police escort the Blazers out to the bus, which is parked as close to the door as possible so they don't have to traverse anything to get from the edge of the War Memorial and onto the bus. And they're about to pull away, and they realize, wait a minute, we left Bob behind. He's up in the booth, and I got no color, man, nothing. I'm my own engineer, everything. I'm just plugged back into Syracuse, and I'm trying to fill this time because I don't know exactly what they're going to do. So now they send 2 or 3 of the players, to whom I'm eternally grateful, back in, the 2 roughest guys they got, back in to tap me on the shoulder. I quickly sign off. They escort me out through the back door, and into the bus we go, and literally, as we're trying to pull out of the parking lot, I'm not making any of this up, there are Johnstown fans, if we can call them fans, trying to rock the bus from side to side and overturn the bus. And finally, we get out of this war zone, and we get, maybe 10 miles out of town, and it's late at night. We got to stop for something to eat. So we pull over to some roadside restaurant and bar, and there's a few Johnstown fans sitting in there, and we know what liquid courage can do, and a few of them decided that they wanted to resume the fracas. They did not fare well against the Blazer roster.
Wow. He's Bob Costas, NBC Sports. Tough guy as well, joining us.
Yeah, well, I must say I was observing the fisticuffs going on in the bar and trying to get the combatants to settle things amicably, but I think I was a non-factor.
Is it good for horse racing that we have a Triple Crown winner?
Yeah, it's good that we have a legitimate Triple Crown chance. In terms of NBC's ratings, it's not going to affect it if California Chrome doesn't win because all the anticipation is there, leading up to it. What you need is a horse that captures the public's imagination, and that's the public way beyond those who read the racing form on a daily basis, that brings the casual observer in, and that seems to have a legitimate shot, and that's what we got now.
The physical portion of this race, The difference between the Belmont, that horses aren't bred for the Belmont. They're bred for the dirt. They're bred for other distances. But how does the distance affect California Chrome?
Boy, I don't present myself as a horse racing expert, but I will quote one, Dwayne Lucas, who has won 14 Triple Crown races, more than any other trainer. He said in the modern era, the formula for a Triple Crown winner is a superior horse in a year of less than superior competition, which is not to say that there aren't other horses capable of winning this race, but there's no Alydar to push affirmed each time. California Chrome is clearly the class of the field, but as we've seen happen in so many times since 1978, a lot of stuff can go wrong. It's horse racing, and a mile and a half is the longest distance, the most grueling distance, and he's the only horse in the field that will have run in all three of the races in a 5-week span.
Do you view Secretariat as an athlete?
Well, it galled me when he finished ahead of Mickey Mantle on ESPN's list of the top 50 athletes of the 20th century. Or I think he was one slot ahead or one slot behind. I'm like, hang on, he's a horse. I think we need a separate category.
So you don't view horses as athletes?
I'm not trying to disparage anything that they do. They're remarkable creatures. I just think we need a separate category. Or the next thing you know, you're going to have the winner of the Westminster Dog Show finishing ahead of Ted Williams on the next list.
Before I let you go, I saw this story. Why did this story come out about O.J. Simpson calling you during the white Bronco chase? You've mentioned it a couple times, but it just came out again, I think, in Playboy. So,
I didn't realize that. My subscription lapsed during college.
So O.J. tried to. You're on the air. Were you hosting? The NBA Finals.
I have told the story before, not often. Both ESPN and Dateline are doing 20th anniversary of this event specials, and they each interviewed me, and maybe something came out of that from the transcript or whatever. But I was hosting Game 5 at Madison Square Garden between the Rockets and the Knicks, and people may recall that part of the NBC coverage was a split screen, basketball on the one side and Bronco going down the highway on the other side. And many times I was transitioning between Marv Albert calling the game and Tom Brokaw, who was covering what he rightly referred to as an unfolding Greek tragedy on the other hand. And I found out subsequently, I didn't know it that night, but found out the one time I've spoken to O.J. since the murders, which was when I visited him at the L.A. County Jail in November of 1994, before the trial began. I think the trial began in January of 95. And you think about the strange circumstances. The late Robert Kardashian picked me up at the hotel, brought me to the jail. Al Cowlings was there, and it was me, Cowlings, and Kardashian visiting with O.J., and they explained that they had tried to call. They just brought it up in small talk, if you can have small talk in a situation like that O.J. had tried to call me from the back of the Bronco. He called my home number in St. Louis, and my son Keith, who then was 8, was with me at the Garden. And my wife and daughter were out. No one was home. There was no answering machine. As you know, I'm always behind the technological curve. So the phone just rang and rang. And then he tried the studio at 30 Rock, because the same studio where he was part of the NFL show was where we did the NBA show from. And there was no one there since we were doing it from the Garden. And an engineer picks up the phone and hears a voice say, I got to speak to Bob Costas. He's not here. Well, I have to speak to him. Well, he's at the Garden. Who's calling? O.J. Simpson. And the engineer says, yeah, right, click, and hangs up the phone. So,
wow. What if they had patched you through him to you?
I think what would have had to have happened, and you just hope you would have had the presence of mind to do a decent job, is that on the one hand, you have to ask him all the pertinent questions. You don't know what his answers might be, but you'd have to ask him questions as gently as possible. At the same time, you couldn't deny that you were friends at that point, and you'd be trying to do the same thing that the police officials were doing. We've all heard the tapes. They're trying to convince him, O.J., no matter what the situation is, think of your kids, think of your mom, put the gun down, surrender peaceably. Because at that time, we didn't know, whether he would blow his brains out in the back of the Bronco. they said he had a gun to his head. Or when he got to his driveway in Brentwood, those tense moments when he got out of the car, we didn't know if there'd be gunplay there, if the police would have to arrest him using force. As it turns out, he just gave up peacefully. But we didn't know how any of this would unfold. So I guess, it would have been a tightrope walk between interviewer, quasi-negotiator, and certainly friend at the same time. It would have been the all-time strangest, but it never happened.
How weird was it to see him in prison?
It was pretty strange. That's an understatement. They brought him around a corner, and he had looked to me at that point like he'd lost about 20 pounds. He was in a blue prison jumpsuit, shackled at both ankles and both wrists, and yet a portion of his personality was intact. So as he came around the corner with the guards flanking him and saw me sitting there behind a glass partition, the first thing he says, he kind of like shakes his body from side to side and goes, "Bob, Costas," and then he sits down, and the way you shake hands is you put your hand up against the partition, and you match your hand. That's the equivalent of a handshake. And he insisted on his innocence and kept saying, "Bob, you know me. I'm a smart guy. If I was going to do something like this, would I be dumb enough to leave a glove behind? Would I be dumb enough to do this, this, and this?" And what I'm thinking is, look, once somebody murders two people, if in fact that's what happened, then all bets are off in terms of what your normal pattern of behavior would be. And I remember to everything he said, I simply said, "Well, you'll have a chance to tell your story in court. Your side will come out soon enough." I thought that was the only reasonable thing to say under those circumstances.
Do you think he did it?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Have fun this weekend. Should be great weather and great moment there. And as always, we appreciate the stories, Bob.
Thanks, Dan. Have a good weekend.
All right, Bob Costas, NBC Sports.